Cheong-san woke up with a groan as he took in the room around him. The shelves were packed, and he could still feel his weapon held in his hand. As his vision cleared, he remembered where he was and the chaotic experience of getting here. He gave the room another once-over as his eyes finally settled on the sleeping form of the girl he had come all this way to save. In his mind, there was still a struggle on whether what he was doing was right or not, but that was a struggle for later. His eyes looked over at the supplies lining the shelves. He knew the rest of his friends upstairs could use them, but given the low snarls and growls coming from beyond the door, he knew risking it would be stupid, especially carrying stuff. He also doubted he could make it all the way back there with food and protecting Na-Yeon at the same time. That thought stopped his train of thought. I am actually thinking about her in my plan. He let out a humorless chuckle before putting his head against the wall and looking up at the ceiling. Na-Yeon was just watching Cheong-san take in the room. She had seen his initial panic when he woke up and the calm that followed as he took stock of where he was. She was still surprised he had fallen asleep with her in the room, even if she remembered how hard he fought to stay awake last night whilst looking over at her. She was glad at least one of them had been able to get some sleep because it had been next to impossible for her. Every time that she had closed her eyes, she saw him, saw them looking at her. She tried every time to raise her hands to show she didn't do anything, but every time the small bloodied cloth always dropped from her hand. Even when she threw it, somehow always appeared back in her hand. She woke up screaming a bit earlier that night before her mouth had been quickly muffled by Cheong-san. He had waited with his hand covering her mouth till he was sure that the snarls and bangs outside had died down, and she had calmed down before he retreated to his side to keep watch again. Her hair was covering her face as she observed him, even when he had gone to sleep. There was a curiosity there, but even in his slumber when he tightened his grip on his weapon, it was enough for her to keep her distance. I'm sorry. Cheong-san was momentarily startled before his eyes settled on Na-Yeon's sleeping form. He thought that she had been sleeping, but clearly he was wrong. His face scrunched up a bit before he faced away. Sorry won't fix anything. She knew he was right, but it still stung to hear it. I didn't what? Didn't mean for it to happen. The snarls and bangs grew louder outside, and he could see the look of fear on Na-Yeon's face as she sat up when the noises outside grew louder. Unconsciously, he started calming himself. The last thing he needed was both of them dead. He saw her eyes come into view lit by the early morning sun. He knew the situation they were in wasn't ideal, but her face looked as if the life had been sucked out of her, and the bags under her eyes didn't help. So calmly, he took a deep breath and kept reminding himself that he had come back to save her. He's gone all because of what? You couldn't handle someone showing you up, or because you thought he was beneath you. He seethed out the last part of the sentence, trying to tame the venom that was coming from his mouth. I just... She couldn't answer because she knew he was right, and the way his hand tightened on the baseball bat in his hand, and the way those eyes narrowed, she could tell he was fighting it. But which one was going to win? She wanted to die because she knew her reasons for taking a life were so insecure, because all she wanted was to get back at some person she considered below her. A small part, however, wanted to do something at least to show that she wasn't only a murderer. It would have taken a long time for it to grow on its own, but the talk with Cheong-san seemed to make it shrink and grow. I know what I did can never be forgiven, she spoke, and she could see he was about to interrupt her again, but she still continued choosing to look away from his scrunched face. I did it for stupid reasons, and because I just wanted to put him down, make him feel where I thought he belonged. She could see the rage build on his face, but still soldiered on. I still want you to kill me, she said, before looking down, and that unsettled him. He had planned on killing her back then, but he had never really thought about what happens after you had killed someone. I see him every time I close my eyes, she said, as the grip Cheong-san had on his baseball bat loosened and his hate flattered. Before this, I used to have dreams of everyone at school. A small laugh escaped her. They would all be calling me things, or just looking at me with those eyes. He scoffed. The reason for his friend's death was because she was insecure. She heard him but continued because she felt if she didn't say it now, she could never say it again. Then when this started, it was those monsters. Then after, she flattered when it came to the event. Then I now see him, sometimes you. That surprised him as he looked at her face, trying to lock eyes with her, but she wouldn't face him. No matter how much I wash my hands, they're never clean, and whenever I try to throw it away, it always reappears in my hands. She raised and looked at her right hand, as if she could see whatever was haunting her. It took him a moment before he remembered that rag with blood that she had used, but then she locked eyes with him, and he could see that look on her face. "What about me?" he hesitantly asked, remembering she mentioned him appearing when she closed her eyes, even though now she doubted it was to sleep. "Sometimes you're just shouting at me. Other times you're chasing me with the monsters and other people helping you, and somehow I know you're going to get me." She let out a chuckle that unsettled him. "The worst one is when you do nothing." The smile that was on her face almost seemed broken, and it tugged at him so much so that he had to keep himself from trying to offer some sort of comfort, even though he wasn't good at any of that. "I ask you to judge me, be mad at me, to kill me, but you never do anything, but just stare at me with that look of hate and pity." He could see the tears flowing down her face, even as he tried not to believe it. "I know I deserve to get whatever is coming to me because I even managed to get someone who cared about me to die out there." He knew she was talking about Mrs. Park as she continued her tearful confession, the snarls of the monsters outside all but forgotten. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered as she took shaky breaths. "It only settled in what I did when I was in here alone." He looked at her and relaxed slightly. "I had killed someone. My hands had blood on them now." Na-Yeon locked eyes with him again. "Can you tell me about him?" That seemed to skyrocket his rage as he surged up. The grip on his weapon tightened as he seethed. He didn't know what reaction he had hoped to get, but once more there was no fear, only a weak meekness that threatened to swallow him whole. "She's a monster. You know that. You know what she did. She killed him. Just because she was insecure, she ended him. No monster like that deserves to live." He chanted it to himself, but could already feel his momentum waning. His mother wouldn't want this. Anjo wouldn't want this. Even he didn't want this. Cheong-san wanted to scream, but the monsters outside would hear, so he sat back down and finally let go of his weapon. He knew that he didn't have it in him to kill a person. Not her, at least. So after some hesitation, he started. "He really liked my mom's fried chicken." "Fried?"